But freedom without morality is freedom. It's not freedom, but actually destruction. Because if your freedom harms others, is it still freedom? If your choices leave a trail of pain, can you still call it liberty or freedom? So the cultural industry creates an illusion of individuality while mass producing preferences for you. So in that point, you think your choices are actually your own.
Yeah, and for me, freedom is the free will to actually pursue the ideals you sincerely believe in. Like, freedom is something that has context. Freedom is something that should be related to the environment you belong to. Freedom should be something that we see and we choose, admitting that what there are responsibilities that comes with them. For me, that is freedom. Freedom. It is the one thing humanity has fought for throughout history. The ultimate promise of liberation from oppression. But is it as poor and as untainted as it sounds? What if, hidden beneath the promise of freedom, lies a paradox, the tyranny of freedom? On today's episode of Understanding Our Social World, we will peel back the layers of this concept to ask the difficult questions. Are we truly free, or are we bound by invisible chains disguised as choice? How do powerful systems and individuals weaponize the very notion of freedom to manipulate and control society? And why does the abundance of choices sometimes feel more like a curse than a blessing? Joining me today is Abhulimen Jonathan, a graduate of mass communication at the prestigious University of Ahmadu Bello University Zaria. He is a social scientist, a critical thinker, and someone who is so passionate about how our social world works and how it operates. He will help us navigate the complexities of this topic, and together we will challenge the conventional narratives about freedom, exploring its illusions, its burdens, and its power to shape our lives in ways we rarely stop to question. Mr. Jonathan, thanks for having me on this episode of Understanding Our Social World.
Thank you very much for having me on your podcast.
So I'm going to ask the very first question. What does freedom mean to you? And is freedom a universal reality, or can you say that it is an illusion crafted by those in power to maintain control?
Okay. Before I start off on what freedom actually means to me, there are some things I would like to say. You see, freedom is a very beautiful word. Everyone wants to be free, and everyone claims, or some people do claim to be free. But freedom isn't as simple as doing whatever we want. Because freedom is not a license for chaos. It's the responsibility to choose what's right. And often do we twist freedom as humans, do we twist freedom into something unrecognizable? The funny thing about freedom is that it is always told as something that's absolute. You know, when they say, okay, you are free, do what you want, you understand. But freedom without morality is freedom. It's not freedom, but actually destruction. Because if your freedom harms others, is it still freedom? If your choices leave a trail of pain, can you still call it liberty or freedom? So we humans, we have a strange way of demanding freedom while running away from responsibility and accountability. You know, some people say, don't judge me, it's my life. Yes, it's your life, but your actions do not exist in a vacuum. So freedom is not the right to ignore consequences or trample over others just because it feels good. True freedom doesn't work without boundaries. And these boundaries are shaped by justice, empathy, and morality. So, like, true freedom is not the absence of boundaries, but the presence of responsibility. Because if freedom is just doing whatever you want, then what happens when what you want hurts someone else? You understand? So, freedom isn't free when it costs someone else's dignity or their safety or their humanity. So, I do not believe in freedom as an excuse for wrongdoing. Freedom must be anchored on morality or it becomes chaos. So, freedom is not universal. No, not yet. Freedom is, I would say, is conditional and contextual. What feels like freedom to one person might actually look like oppression to another. So freedom is often wielded as a weapon to justify by those in power to justify their dominance while pacifying the oppressed. So many times what we call freedom is just a carefully managed illusion. When they say you are free to
Wow.
vote, but are you actually free? Are you choosing between options that were designed to maintain the same system? Are you free or just free enough to feel like you are in control? So as Nigerians, we know this too well. We fought for freedom, you understand? We freedom from colonial rule, freedom to govern ourselves. But what have we done with that freedom? Too often we left the powerful people use it as a tool to distract and divide us. They promise freedom but deliver the tyranny of broken systems. They deliver corruption and inequality. Is that freedom or is it a mirage? That's a question. So true freedom is not selfish. It isn't about doing whatever you want or whenever you want. It's about creating a society where our choices now don't come at the expense of someone else's dignity. And it's about ensuring that our rights don't erase someone else's. Like you see in the US today where they advocate for freedom and the rest, you see what the society has actually turned to with the LGBTQ and everything. I'm sure we all know about that. So what freedom means to me, freedom is responsibilities. It's about knowing that my liberty is tied to yours and that we rise together or fall together. So freedom is the power to choose what's right, not just for me, but for everyone. Because if freedom becomes an excuse for more immorality, it stops being freedom and starts becoming chaos. And if freedom is just a tool for control, it stops being freedom and it becomes oppression. So freedom must be shared or it isn't freedom at all. And freedom must be built on fairness, justice, and equality. And it's not about doing what you want, but creating a society that where everybody can be able to live, thrive, and coexist without fear or exploitation.
Thank you so much. To demand for freedom is to demand for responsibility. That is so profound. And like you also said, and that can be seen in every environment. If the freedom is on the side of people and it allows them to do whatever thing they they feel like doing, it leads to anarchy. That is anarchy. That is
Yes.
destruction. And if freedom on the side of the leadership is that they're free to do whatever thing they want to do, that is oppression in itself. It is not
Yes.
freedom. Thank you so much. That is so profound. When people feel free to choose, are their are their choices truly their own? Or are they subtly shaped by societal systems, media, and powerful institutions?
Well, that's a very good question. When people feel free to choose, the question that should come up is, are choices we make, are they truly our own, or are these choices actually shaped by forces far beyond our awareness? At first glance, okay, yes, freedom feels like, yes, we have the ultimate power to decide to pick some whatever we want to chart our own course, you understand? But when you
Yeah.
think more critically, when you dig a little deeper, you start to wonder, are you choosing or are you being chosen for? Let me use this the culture industry. I don't know, for mass communicators, we know about the culture industry very much. So like we use it as a term to describe how media, entertainment, and institutions, they package ideas, values, and lifestyles into something that's like neatly consumable options, you understand? Like the movies we watch, the music we listen to, the ads we see, even the news we consume, because they are not just informing us but shaping our desires and even what we prioritize and what we take or make as our choice, you understand? So now let's take consumerism for example. Now you think you are free to buy what you want, yes, but are you really? Every decision from the phone in your hand to the shoe on your feet now has been influenced by marketing strategies. It has been influenced by brand loyalty. It has been influenced by social norms that tell you what's cool and what's necessary and what makes you you. So the cultural industry creates an illusion of individuality while mass producing preferences for you. So in that point, you think you're actually Your choices are actually your own. And even more dangerous now is how societal systems and institutions they steer these our choices quietly. The education systems can actually train us to think a certain way. Media narratives tell us who to admire, who to distrust, and what to aspire. Governments and corporations they also wield immense control over what we perceive as possible and acceptable. So the idea of choice becomes less about autonomy when you look at it, and it's more about selecting from pre-approved options. Just like you go to a restaurant now, the waiter presents you with a menu, a fixed menu, because on what is on that menu, you are limited to options which you take as a choice. You are limited to option. Whatever you might have desired before coming there is not what you get, and you have no choice there but to pick from what's in the menu. So the truth is, choices doesn't exist. They don't exist in a vacuum. They are shaped by context, by history, by cultural systems. Your freedom to choose often operates within boundaries you didn't even create in the first place, and they are guided by values you may not even agree with, but they have been normalized over time. So our choices are not truly our own entirely. Even within this system, we don't have we although we do have the power to reflect, to question, and to resist. So true freedom now here will be our ability to choose, our ability to think critically why we choose what we choose. So we are able to recognize the invisible hands that actually guide our decisions and ask whether they align with our true values. Because in the end, freedom is not just about escaping control, but about reclaiming our mind in a world that profits from steering it. I don't know if you get.
Yeah, I understand. Ever since I've read about culture industry, you mentioned one particular issue, one particular point that I've never come across, and that is the cultural industry actually manufactures our preference. That is, in fact, it is one thing that okay, they manufacture like whatever thing we buy, they actually manufacture it. They get us to do whatever thing we want to do under the illusion of freedom through
Yes,
brand loyalty, through advertisement, among others. And also, even our choices, like our preferences, you understand, the cultural industry like the manufacturers them, you understand.
yes,
This is very, very important. And for those of us that are listening to us, one thing we need to understand is that for everything we are claiming that we have freedom to do this, we have freedom to do that, it is within a particular context. Without context, there is no freedom. Without context, this is an anarchy. With a wrong context, it becomes oppression. That is one thing we all need to understand in our pursuit for freedom. And also, another thing is that the true freedom now, like you said, lies in our ability to critically think whether the choices we made are something that are actually genuine. That is, for example, I want to get a phone. So, what's this when you want to get a phone? What's stuff do I really need this for to do whatever thing I want to do? So like questioning these things is where the true freedom lies, not
yes.
our ability or inability to choose from variety of pre-manufactured options, pre-manufactured choices. Thank you so much for that answer.
Thank you very
We'll
much.
move to the next question. How do political systems use the promise of freedom as a tool to suppress dissent or justify inequality?
Okay, the promise of freedom. So about this, the promise of freedom, I would say, is like a very powerful tool in the anarchy, in the arsenal of political system. But it's also one of the most dangerous weapons when used deceptively. Freedom is dangled like a carrot, you understand? A promise that like so enticing that people will endure hardship, sacrifice, and even silence themselves to keep believing in it. And the irony of this is that the very systems that promise freedom often use that promise to suppress dissent and justify inequality. So, how do they even do this? First, they redefine what freedom is itself. They frame freedom not as a collective good, but as an individual pursuit. your freedom to hustle, your freedom to succeed, your freedom to rise above the rest. So now this shifts the responsibility for systemic failures onto the individual. When people struggle now, the system says you are free, it's up to you, ignoring the fact that the playing field was actually rigged from the start. So in this way, the promise of freedom justifies inequality by blaming the oppressed for oppression. And in certain societies, we see this play out on a daily basis. The political elite, they preach about democracy and freedom, while they hoard resources, they rig elections, and they maintain structures that keep the majority impoverished. And they tell us, okay, you are free to vote. But what good is voting when the options are handpicked by the same people in power? They tell us you are free to speak, but dissent is met with intimidation or arrest or worse. We see what happens when people do peaceful protests. We see what happens. Aside the violent protests, they offer us the illusion of choice, but the outcomes are already predetermined. And then there's the weaponization of freedom against dissent. So when people demand accountability now, the system twists their words saying you are free to protest, but don't disrupt the peace. And when the protests grow too loud, suddenly that same promise of freedom turns into accusation of rebellion. It turns into accusation of anarchy or even treason. So they suppress dissent not by denying freedom outrightly, but by using the language of freedom to frame dissent as a threat to stability, societal stability. So, but perhaps the most insidious way these political systems use the promise of freedom is by creating divisions among the people. So they turn freedom as into a competition where one group's gain feels like another's loss. They pit regions, they pit religions, they pit ethnicities against each other, and they distract us from the real oppressors. And in doing so, they ensure that we fight amongst ourselves instead of uniting to demand true freedom. So how do we resist this manipulation? First, we have to recognize that freedom is not a gift from the powerful. It is a right that must be claimed and defended collectively. So true freedom is not about the individual. It is about building system that uplifts everyone. It's about ensuring that freedom is not a tool for maintaining inequality, but but it should be seen as a foundation for justice, for equity, for shared prosperity. So in the end, the promise of freedom should not be a weapon by those who are at the helm of affairs in the political systems, but rather it should be a mirror that actually reflects the soul of our nation. You understand? It should be a challenge to live up to the ideals we claim to hold dear. Anything less of that is not freedom, but it's just control wrapped in a very pretty package.
Control wrapped in a very pretty package. That's amazing. We also see that playing out in the international politics too, where there's this particular example I used to give when it comes to freedom, even this time around press freedom. When the Western world wants to report issues in the global south, in the less developed country in Africa, they do report things like suppression of freedom, suppression of press freedom. And sometimes when news platform like BBC, when they ask leaders, newly emerging leaders or newly emerged leaders about questions on how they are going to hold their environment, hold their country, they do ask them about, okay, what about the press freedom? What about the freedom of press? But one particular example I used to give to dismantle that argument of this illusion of press freedom or freedom in general was what Julius Assange did, because he revealed some of the war crimes committed by the years in some certain wars long time ago. And what happened? He was treated like a criminal, and that is actually what happens when governments weaponize freedom. And like you said, one of the things they do is what they reframe, they give a new understanding about or a new meaning to freedom, so that what they'll be able to use it to achieve their own particular purpose. But then when we talk of freedom, it shouldn't be like that. So we'll move to the next question. This question is about consumerism. You've mentioned about consumerism before and capitalism. Can consumerism and capitalism create a false freedom where endless options makes us feel liberated while actually binding us to cycles of dependency?
Okay, that's a good question. So, consumerism and capitalism. Okay. Now, I would say these are two forces. Yeah, these two forces now they promise freedom. They promise individuality. But now these things they sometimes deliver a paradox. I'm not trying to criticize capitalism. At first glance now, okay, now they appear to liberate us with endless options, choose whatever you want. You understand? So, but the more you look, the clearer it becomes that this freedom of choice is often a carefully constructed illusion. And it's not designed to actually empower us, but to bind us to an endless cycle of dependency. So when you think, okay, now under capitalism, now the idea of freedom is sold to us now. Okay, let's say in products, experiences, and lifestyles. Yeah, right. You are told that
Yeah.
you are free because you can choose between 10 brands of toothpaste or five different phone models or 20 clothing styles. But this freedom isn't really about meeting your needs. It's about fueling your wants actually. Needs are finite and wants are infinite. So capitalism thrives on not fulfilling your needs, but on constantly creating those new desires. And once you are hooked, freedom becomes a treadmill, not even a destination, as expected. So now this illusion is very stark, I must say, because now we are bombarded with, okay, like now in our country now we are bombarded with imported goods, global brands, and the shiny promises of modern consumerism. We are told that when you buy the right car, you wear the right clothes, or you use the latest smartphone, you're on the path to personal liberation. But in reality, this is creating a culture of consumption that is meant to trap us. And we become dependent on things we don't need just because we want to impress people that do not care. All while and at the end, we ignore the systemic inequalities that keep many from even participating in this so-called freedom of choice. So what even makes this more dangerous is how capitalism ties this freedom, false freedom, to identity. You are no longer just a person, you are a customer, you are a consumer, you are a market segment, you understand? So your value is tied to your purchasing power. And your choices are framed not as necessities, but as a declaration of who you are. Yet the more you consume, the more dependent you become, and not just on the product, but on the system that produces these products. So to answer that question, yes, consumerism and capitalism does create or do create, sorry, a false freedom. It's a freedom designed by endless options, but limited by economic structures that prioritize profits over people. And this is not liberation, but a sophisticated form of control. Yeah. So you feel free because you can choose, but what are you choosing? And what you are choosing is often dictated by advertising, by peer pressure, and a system that tries of keeping you in a perpetual state of wanting, wanting, wanting. So true freedom isn't about having unlimited choices in your store, but it's about having the ability to actually live a dignified life free from poverty and exploitation and manipulation. It's about breaking the cycle of dependency, challenging the systems that actually perpetuate inequality and ensure that everyone, and not just the wealthy few, have access to opportunities and resources. So, as a people, we must ask ourselves, are we truly free if our choices are actually dictated by a system designed to profit off our struggles? You see people, yes, you actually see people in society today who struggle so hard to get things that they are not so important. They are not so important. So now, or is it the path to real freedom found in reclaiming our own agency, like valuing our community over consumption and creating an economy that actually serves people rather than enslave them? Because in the end, now, freedom is not something that is for sale. And any system that tells you it was never about freedom in the first place.
Thank you so much for the answer. So capitalism and consumerism, they use a kind of endless, the illusion of endless freedom So make us bind, like to bind us, to make sure that what we are actually binded to whatever thing they want us to bind. And they try to create that sense of competition in such a way that when our friends get new stuff, we feel so like we too need to get it. Not because they actually satisfy our wants or they actually satisfy what we really need, but then those needs were actually created by what? By the effects or by the powerful forces of consumerism and capitalism, by the influences of peer pressure, by what you are seeing on the screen. They are not what we needed in the first place. Because of the way advert is being used, the way capitalists use adverts to create these options, we are binded to them to actually want to get things that we don't necessarily need, but needs created by them. Thank you so much for that answer.
Thank you very much.
In societies where freedom is celebrated, how do those in power exploit this narrative to avoid accountability and suppress collective action?
I think in societies where freedom is celebrated, so the narrative of freedom can become or might become a double-edged sword. You know, on one side, yes, it would inspire individuals to actually dream, to innovate, to express themselves. But on the other side, it can also be weaponized by those in power to avoid accountability and to suppress collective action. How? By redefining freedom itself to fit into their agenda or to serve their agenda. First, they will glorify individual freedom. Okay, like, okay, they will downplay collective responsibility. They will tell us that, okay, yes, you are free to pursue your dreams, you are free to chart your own path. But now, in doing so, they shift the burden of systemic failure onto you. If the economy collapses, if the infrastructure fails, if the society crumbles, it's not because of their corruption, it's not because of their incompetence, it's because you didn't hustle hard enough. So freedom becomes a scapegoat, a way to erase their accountability by making every individual feel solely responsible for their outcomes. So then there is this tactic of distraction where they sell us freedom in symbolic forms, okay, freedom of speech, freedom of movement, freedom of this. But they ensure that these freedoms stay superficial. You can speak, but they will not listen. You can move, but the rules will not lead anywhere. So they give you just enough freedom to feel empowered, but not enough to demand that real change. So this is illusion when you look at it. So it's even more insidious when how they even use the rhetoric of freedom to like divide and suppress collective action. So now they frame protests, they frame strikes or movements as threats to individual freedoms. We've seen that happen. So why should others block your road? Why should a strike stop your daily hustle or you from going to school? So they pit individuals against the collective, you understand, by weaponizing the narrative of
Yeah.
freedom to fracture that unity. And when the division takes root now, they reinforce it with propaganda. They convince people that the pursuit of collective justice is an attack on personal liberty. But perhaps the most dangerous exploitation of freedom is the ability to actually blur the line between your rights and your privileges. So they will condition us to believe that basic rights, okay, like the access to healthcare, education, clean water, security, and the rest, are not actually entitlements, but privileges we must earn. By doing so, they turn freedom into a reward system where only those who play by the rules can actually access those things that should actually belong to everyone. And we've actually seen this play out repeatedly. We are told that we are free, yet our freedom exists within the confines of a broken system. So we are free to speak, but dissent is met with suppression. We are free to vote, yes, but freedom to remain for many a very beautiful dream sold by those that would rather make us sorry. So freedom will continue to be a beautiful dream for many.
Okay, thank you so much for that answer. One of the things you actually said is that the idea of freedom is something that has been turned into a reward system. And this is actually going to take us to the next question about freedom. That is, how does freedom inherently favor, or how is freedom inherently used inherently to favor those with privilege? while others are left out with the illusion of choice but no real opportunities.
Absolutely. And when you look at this, this is something that is, I would say, is a global issue. It's a global issue because the narrative of freedom is often used to mask a deeper reality. Now, freedom is supposed to be universal, right? But
Yeah.
now, in reality, it often works in favor of those who already have power, resources, and access. For the privileged now, freedom means a vast array of choices. Choices that are backed by opportunities, choices that are backed by safety nets, choices that are backed by networks, social networks. So they can choose their education, they can choose their career, they can choose their home, and even the way they interact with the state now. But now that shows that their freedom is a luxury. But now, for the majority of us, freedom might just feel like more like a mirage. Yes, we can technically choose, but those choices are actually limited by the harsh constraints of what? Maybe poverty, lack of access to quality education, or the systemic corruption that is eating deep into the country, or the overwhelming weight of societal inequality. So now that means that there is an illusion of choice, which is being sold to us as freedom. And the reality is that many will have to fight tooth and nail to survive, let alone thrive. So now, for many of us now, the idea of freedom is should not just be a matter of making choices. It should be a question of whether we can make a choice at all. Can we choose to live in a safe neighborhood when we can barely afford a roof over our head? That should be a question. Can we choose a career when our education is being compromised by a broken system? That should be a question. Can we choose health when the hospitals are underfunded or and understaffed? That should be a question. So freedom, when it's stripped of its true meaning, it becomes a tool for the powerful to maintain control. So those who are privileged have the luxury of freedom as as a dynamic, so an empowering force. So, but those that are marginalized, they are given just enough to believe that, oh, we are given just enough to believe that we have agency. So, but the moment they try to access true freedom, freedom from hunger, freedom from injustice, freedom from oppression, we are met with barriers designed to keep us in place. But the painful truth is that freedom doesn't automatically level the playing field. Freedom must be cultivated, it must be fought for, it must be shared, and until it is, the privileged will continue to enjoy the fullness of freedom, while the rest of us are left with a semblance of freedom. Yes, a semblance of freedom we think is freedom that doesn't actually translate into meaningful change or opportunity for us. So, yes, freedom favors the privileged because they are the ones who are truly free to live out their choices in a system that is built to actually support them. So, the rest of us, we get the illusion of choice. But now the question is, how long will we allow this illusion to persist? How long will we accept the freedom that is only truly free for a few?
Thank you so much for the amazing response. At one point in time, you made mention of the fact that these, the powerful, they are the ones that actually enjoy the real freedom, while those, the less privileged, are given a semblance of freedom. And one of the things you also said is about the fact that when freedom is on the right, that is enjoying, you understand, by those in power, at the which at in most cases used to be at at the expense of the less privileged, that is no more freedom any longer. It is tyranny. And also, that's some of the things you did mention. But then, how do propaganda and misinformation manipulate the concept of freedom to serve the interest of few rather than many?
Okay. As I said earlier, freedom is actually often presented as a universal right. You understand, a cornerstone of society that
Yes.
every individual is entitled to. But
Yeah.
when you look deeper, when you look closer, you see that freedom is not always the same for everyone. The powerful people now, okay, they have a way of manipulating the concept of freedom. They shape it and twist it until it serves their own interest, while it leaves us, the masses, under the illusion of liberty. And the tools they actually use that you actually pointed in your question is propaganda and misinformation. Now, propaganda here and misinformation now might not just it's not just about lying, yes, but now them trying to shape our perception and control the narrative. Now, In our world today now, information flows freely, and it's easy. Is ironically speaking, it's easier than ever for the few to control the many. In this world where information is at every fingertips. So now what propaganda does in this case now is to create a version of freedom that seems accessible to everyone. But in reality, it is selective, it is distorted, and in many cases, it is very dangerous. Okay, now take for example, now the message is pushed by those in power that okay, you are free. They proclaim that you are free. Yeah, they say that okay, this is a democracy. You understand? They shout. That is their shout out. Okay, and yet in the same breath, they stifle the very freedom they pretend to uphold. So they spread misinformation through various media. They come to convince the public that their rights are intact, that their voices matter, that their freedoms are being fought for, when in fact those in power are the ones orchestrating the system for their own benefit. So now they are creating a false freedom in this case, which is a very perfect bait to make people feel free enough to comply while they quietly maintain control. So, and we've seen this dance play over and over again in many societies. The politicians, they tell us we are free to vote, and then, but in the next breath, they manipulate elections, they bribe voters, they silence opposition. You understand? They undermine the very democracy they claim to protect. And we are told that we are free to speak our minds, but the moment we do, we find ourselves targeted by the same forces that define this narrative. So the freedom they offer is not the freedom to challenge their power, but the freedom to follow their lead, not to challenge their power. So misinformation feeds this paradox. Man, propaganda and misinformation, they feed this paradox. So when people are fed half truths, lies, and distractions, they will stop saying the truth altogether. And they will start believing that their supposed freedom is real, even as their liberty are being quietly eroded. So they are taught that their struggle for a better life is either unnecessary or hopeless, and that the corrupt system is simply the way things are. But when you look at it, it's all smokes and mirrors, because a system that is meant to keep many compliant while serving the interest of the few. So now the true tyranny here is that while the masses believe they are free, the powerful are controlling the very definition of freedom. They are creating an illusion of autonomy while ensuring that their grip on power remains unchallenged. So they manipulate our understanding of what it means to be free. They twist it to serve their very needs. And through propaganda and misinformation, they not only maintain control, but they make it seem like we've all agreed to it. So to answer the question, propaganda and misinformation don't just distort reality, but they manufacture a new reality for us. One where the few thrive at the expense of the many. So they manipulate the those in power, they manipulate the concept of freedom using these tools now to keep the masses docile. You understand? To make us believe that we are free when we are actually imprisoned by their deception. So true freedom, as we all know, cannot exist in the absence of truth. And when misinformation reigns, freedom remains a distant dream.
Thank you very much. You made mention of the fact that freedom doesn't happen in a vacuum. Doesn't happen in a vacuum, sorry. And about the fact that the freedom, when you talk of freedom, freedom has to do with a situation whereby whatever thing I'm free to do doesn't affect my neighbor, doesn't affect those around me. In that kind of situation, it is not freedom, it is not oppression. And in the process of that, the powerful often try to manipulate us, often try to distort our understanding of freedom by what that by trying to manipulate us, by trying to like give us some kind of propaganda in such a way that we are claiming for freedom, that we are clamoring for freedom, begin to serve their interests just in pursuit of freedom. Now,
Yes.
can the belief
Yeah.
of unlimited personal freedom lead to apathy, and where individuals feel disconnected from larger social and political responsibilities?
Okay. The belief in unlimited personal freedom. Let me just say this. It can ironically, yes, lead to apathy. So now when freedom is understood now as I can do whatever I want, now it often disconnects us, we individuals, from the larger web of social and political responsibilities. And now we see this play out in significant ways now. Okay, now you see unlimited freedom. Yes, it sounds like liberating, but it's a double-edged sword. Now, when people are obsessed over their right to do as they please, they will lose sight of the fact that true freedom exists within the context of community. If all I care about now is me, and I forget about us, and when me becomes the center of existence, the result will be apathy. Because why should I care about the system? Why should I care about the society? Why should I care about the government if I believe my own actions exist in a vacuum? So now, this belief is a very dangerous one, a very dangerous one. So now, especially in a country like Nigeria now, where we need collective action to challenge structures that actually hold us back. Now, unlimited personal freedom now often leads to not my problem mentality. It's not my problem. So we see it in those when we see this thing often in those who say, as long as I'm okay, the rest doesn't concern me. We've seen people actually say that. So here's the thing: if the freedom you enjoy today depends on the sacrifices of others who cared enough to fight for it yesterday, ha, that freedom ignores responsibility and is a betrayal of that sacrifice. And let's be very honest now, apathy is exactly what those in power want. When we are too busy pursuing our individual freedoms, we stop holding our leaders accountable. So when we say I'm free to focus on my own hustle, politics does not concern me, we forget that bad governance will still affect our freedom. So unlimited personal freedom is a convenient distraction. It's an illusion that was created to isolate us and make us easier to control. And true freedom is not about apathy. It's about responsibility, like I said earlier. So true freedom will ask you, okay, what am I doing to ensure that others can be free too? Because if my freedom makes me blind to oppression, it makes me blind to inequality, it makes me blind to injustice, then I'm not really free. I'm just complicit in someone else's chains. So in Nigeria now, systemic issues like corruption, you will know what happened, poverty, insecurity, they thrive on public indifference when you look deeply. And we can't afford the luxury of apathy in these situations. Freedom must be balanced with the duty to care. It must be balanced with the duty to act and to stand up, not just for ourselves, but for each other. So, yeah, the belief in unlimited personal freedom can lead to apathy, but it doesn't have to. The antidote is by realizing that freedom isn't just about individual choices, it's about collective progress. Because in the end, if your freedom doesn't contribute to greater good, is it really freedom? Or is it just selfishness in disguise?
Thank you very much for that. So, with freedoms comes responsibility. With freedom comes social and political responsibilities. And freedom, individual freedom, the pursuit of individual freedom, like you said, is a convenient distraction in such a way that every one of us mind our business and will be less concerned about what's happening to us and what's happening to people, what's happening to the people around us, and what's happening to the community at
Yes.
large. There was a particular instance that happened. One of my mentors told me about. He went to Egypt and he was entering a car, like he was in a taxi. The meter is fault, like the meter is not functioning. Almost all the taxis, the meter is not functioning. And after some times, the man asked something. It was like, why is the meter not functioning? Then the other person asked, what's what is that particular thing that we should be discussing now in the motor? Like we should be discussing now in the car. Or we used to discuss about before when we are riding OCs, those stuff. So we used to discuss about things that are actually happening in our environment, things that are actually happening in our society. And the man said, yes, the reason why all these meters are broken is to stop us from actually looking outside. Now you are wondering, the meter is not working. How much am I going to pay me? How much are you going to am I going to charge you? And you'll be wondering how much is this guy going to pay me? And from there, we'll be prevented from looking out at
Yeah.
what is happening in our environment because we are much more concerned with what our personal needs. And this,
Wow.
in such a way, is how sometimes freedom can be manufactured in such a way that
Yes.
I just want to satisfy my need. I just want to satisfy my need. And in that situation, we forget about things that happen in society. The society that make us, we forget about it. The political atmosphere, the political environment that actually make us, that will actually affect our freedom. We forget about it just in pursuit of personal freedom, which in
Yeah.
reality doesn't exist. How does the tension between individual freedom and collective welfare shape the narratives of freedom in modern society?
Hmm. You see, this tension now between individual freedom and collective welfare, I would say is a very defined is like one of the most defining narratives of freedom in modern society. And this tension now is not something that's theoretical. It's something that is lived and felt and experienced daily. So now, when you look at freedom at its core now, is a balancing act now because it balances the individual's right to live their truth and pursue their aspirations, but it also balances the community's need to maintain order, to maintain fairness, to maintain harmony. So individual freedom might say, "Let me do as I wish," but collective welfare will ask, "Okay, what happens to others if you do?" So now this tug of war now will shape the boundaries of freedom everywhere. And this could, and like now in a country like Nigeria now, this could be magnified now by our diversity and by the inequality and struggles that for justice in our society. So now our experience of freedom is something that I would describe that is very layered. On one hand, individual freedom now is championed, okay, as a hard won fight, right? You understand? Like now, if you look back in the 1960s, okay, our fights over colonialism and oppression, of which we had a victory. And now, on the other hand, now we see how unbridled individualism can actually undermine collective good. You see, now take the issue of governance now. Leaders may okay, they may claim that freedom is they may claim the freedom to act in their personal interest, but when that freedom comes at the expense of public resources, what happens to the welfare of the people? You see? And it's not just in leadership, it's everywhere. The trader who freely dumps waste into the street now will say, because it's my, or she might say, okay, or he or she might say, it's my shop, I can do what I like. And in the process, she will ignore public health implications for the community. Some drivers now, a driver might decide, oh, he will insist that, okay, I have the freedom, okay. He might insist, okay, let me overtake that vehicle in front of me recklessly because I'm in a hurry, yeah. And he will forget the risk that is posed to every other road user. So now you see that this, now when you look at this now, you see that freedom, this is not freedom. This is self-interest masquerading as liberty to do things. And the paradox now let's see the paradox now is that okay, while unchecked individualism can actually harm the collective good now, suppressing individual freedom in the name of collective welfare can also be equally dangerous. Yes. Now, okay, now, and in this case, let's use the government now. The government now, some governments, they could enforce draconian policies. They could censor voices. They could manipulate freedom, all in the name of for the greater good. We've seen that happen. And these people, they risk creating a society where the people feel silenced, where people feel disempowered, and where people feel disconnected from the very collective they are meant to serve. You can see. So how can we reconcile this tension now should be a question. And this lies like in redefining freedom as a shared responsibility. So freedom it must be rooted in empathy and accountability. So it's not just the right to do as we please, but the duty to ensure that we do uplift and we do uplift and not actually harm others. The individual and the collective are not opposing forces. They are two sides of the same coin. So, like now in modern societies, now we must rewrite this narrative of freedom because freedom cannot thrive without collective welfare, and collective welfare cannot actually survive without individual freedom. But the individual freedom should not remain unchecked. That is the thing. So now they are interdependent. Our survival as a society, it depends on understanding this balance. where individual rights are respected, but never at the expense of the collective. You understand? And where collective welfare is upheld without erasing personal liberties. So in the end, freedom is not just about me or us. So it's about finding a way for both of us to coexist. Because if one thrives while the other one suffers, then what we call freedom is nothing more than a broken promise.
Thank you so much, Mr. Jonathan. We'll move to the last question for today's episode, and I'm very sure we are enjoying this particular episode about what freedom, the mirage of freedom. And if you are enjoying this episode, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and follow and anticipate more episodes about how our social world really works. So our final question for today is: the ultimate tyranny of freedom the way it forces people to carry the burden of constant choices, creating anxiety and delusionment?
Oh, that is a good question. You see, the ultimate tyranny of freedom lies in an unrelenting demand, and that is the burden of constant choice. Yes, freedom is, yes, it's something that is empowering, yes, liberating, but in practice, freedom doesn't free you from responsibility. Yes, it should wrap you in responsibility. It should force you to decide again and again without guarantee that your choices will lead to the outcomes that you desire. Now, as Nigerians, now we live in a society where this paradox is painfully evident. It's painfully evident. On one hand, now we crave freedom. Yes, freedom from bad governance, freedom from poverty, freedom from systemic inequality, the freedom to express ourselves. You understand? But on the other hand, when freedom comes, it really feels like the gift we imagined. Instead, it feels like a heavy load, one that comes with an um an overwhelming number of decisions and very little guidance. So now, you are free to choose your career, but the economy doesn't guarantee that there is a job waiting for you. You are free to pursue happiness, but the reality of basic survival often overshadows that pursuit of happiness. You are free to make your voice heard, but the system rarely listens to that voice. So now, this constant negotiation between freedom and the consequences it brings, it creates a deep sense of anxiety and even disillusionment. So now, why does freedom feel this way? Because freedom is not just the ability to choose, it's the context, as I've always emphasized, in which choices are made. So if the structure within which people are making choices is unfair, is unequal, is devoid of opportunities, freedom is just a cruel joke. It's just a cruel joke. So now the individual now is left in the process of carrying the full weight of responsibility for every failure, while the system pretends to be innocent. So in this way now, freedom is a double-edged sword. It liberates us from external control, but in the process, it imprisons us within the limits of our own decisions. And the anxiety will come of this. It comes from knowing that every choice that we make carries consequences, some of which we can't predict, some which we can't control, and some which we can't undo. So now the disillusionment actually follows when we realize that freedom doesn't always guarantee fulfillment. Sometimes it only guarantees the blame for when things go wrong. So yes, the tyranny or tyranny of freedom is actually real. So, but does that mean we abandon freedom altogether? No, it means we redefine it. Yes, true freedom must go beyond the right to choose. It must include the conditions that make our choices very meaningful, not just any choice. So it's not enough to say that we are free. It's not enough. The society must provide education, opportunity, fairness, and support system that will ensure that freedom empowers rather than burden us. And for humanity as a whole now, freedom will only cease to be tyrannical when it's paired with equity, when it's paired with justice and collective accountability. So until then, freedom for many will only remain a heavy crown, a paradox that liberates but also enslaves. I don't know if you get.
Yeah, I understand. Yeah, and for me, freedom is the free will to actually pursue the ideals you sincerely believe in. Like, freedom is something that has context. Freedom is something that should be related to the environment you all belong to. Freedom should be something that we see and we chase, admitting that what there are responsibilities that comes with them. For me, that is freedom. Freedom, as we explore today, is not as simple as it is often portrayed. As we probably adjourn the discussion of freedom with probably another topic and probably a different guest, we might have started asking ourselves, are we truly free or are we just navigating a carefully constructed illusion? The tyranny of freedom is something we might not always see, but it is present in how our decisions are shaped by unseen forces. Whether that's through the systems of power, social expectations, or even the choices we think we control. As we wrap up today's conversation, I hope we've given you something to think about. Freedom as a powerful tool, but it is one that requires us to stay vigilant, to ask tough questions, and to look beyond the surface. That is freedom. Thanks for joining us, Mr. Jonathan. It's really
Thank you very
nice
much for having
having
me on
you
your
on this
podcast.
episode. As I leave you with this. If we can recognize the hidden chains in our world, can we break free from them? Or do we, in fact, need to redefine freedom itself in order to reclaim it? Thank you for joining us on Understanding Our Social World. Until next time, keep questioning, keep reflecting, and keep challenging the narratives around you.